August 1st, 1943. Low over the wheat fields outside Benghazi, Libya. 4 engines hammered the morning air, Pratt and Whitney radials beating like a giant's heart, as a column of bombers skims so close to the ground that dust wakes in their sleepstream. In the waist of one aircraft, Staff Sergeant Frank DeLuca grips the cold ring of his .50 caliber Browning, watching telephone poles and olive trees whip past like bayonets. The airplane around him feels enormous and oddly shaped, its fuselage deep and swollen, so rotund that men on other airfields had joked it looked pregnant. Even some German fighter pilots had laughed at the silhouette. Too big, too boxy, too awkward to survive. But DeLuca isn't laughing. Not now. Not with the smell of hot oil, cordite, and sweat already living in the metal ribs of the ship, and not with Romania somewhere ahead, where the oil refineries of Ploiești feed Hitler's war machine. A voice crackles through the interphone, thin and urgent beneath the engine roar.
"Keep your heads on a swivel," the pilot says. "No hero stuff. We do this by the book." DeLuca glances forward through the waist windows and catches a brief view of the tail. Twin fins, tall and purposeful, cutting the sky like a signature. This is a B-24 Liberator. Section 1. The Mocked Machine. Years earlier, the Liberator had arrived in the war like an outsider, fast on paper, ugly in the flesh, and misunderstood by men who would bet their lives on its bolts. At Consolidated's plant in San Diego, the engineers had chased a simple idea with ruthless focus: build a bomber that could go farther with more fuel and carry a heavy load. The result was an aircraft shaped by function, not romance. High-aspect Davis wings that promised efficiency, a deep bomb bay with doors that rolled open like a curtain, and tricycle landing gear that made it look almost modern beside older taildraggers. On the ramp, though, airmen judged with their eyes. The B-17 had a proud stance and a legend in the making. The B-24 looked like a toolbox with wings, tall, slab-sided, and broad in the belly. Ground crews called it by nicknames that mixed affection with skepticism. Luftwaffe pilots, when they first saw it in the climb, sometimes dismissed it as a big target, something to punch full of holes and watch burn. But in briefing rooms and operations huts, commanders learned to measure bombers by what they could deliver. By 1942 and 1943, the Liberator multiplied across the world, pouring out of factories in numbers that astonished even the men ordering them. Different blocks, different mods, B-24D models with their greenhouse noses, and later aircraft with more defensive guns as lessons arrived in blood. Wherever the war demanded reach, across the Atlantic, over the jungles of New Guinea, out toward distant islands, the Liberator's long legs mattered. Still, range and payload meant little when flak found you. In North Africa, on the eve of the Ploiești raid, Operation Tidal Wave, crews trained for something almost obscene in its risk: a low-level bombing attack against one of the most heavily defended industrial targets in Europe. The plan demanded speed, surprise, and precision at treetop height, where heavy bombers were never meant to live. You can feel the unease in the way men moved that night, too quiet, too careful with their cigarettes, too polite with their jokes. In the dim light before takeoff, Brigadier General Uzulci Ent, calm, controlled, walked among the aircraft and crews. Nearby, colonels and group commanders like Leon W. Johnson, Keith K. Compton, and Addison E. Baker carried the weight of leading hundreds of men through a corridor of guns. Maps and photographs had shown smokestacks, cracking towers, storage tanks, an industrial city of steel and flame, but photographs didn't show what DeLuca could already imagine. The sound of 88mm flak ripping the air apart at close range. The way a low-flying bomber gives defenders seconds, not minutes, to aim. Now, as the formation races over Libya's sunlit fields,
The Liberators hold formation with a kind of tense discipline. Big, awkward, pregnant machines made suddenly sleek by speed and purpose. The interphone snaps again. Romania is ahead, the navigator says. No turning back. De Luca tightens his grip on the gun ring as the horizon sharpens into something darker than sky, something like smoke.
The smoke isn't from the refineries, not yet. It's from the lead elements already hitting Ploiești's outer defenses, where Romanian and German gunners have started feeding ammunition belts into weapons that can turn a bomber into confetti. The formation splits as planned, different groups peeling toward assigned targets. White 1, White 2, White 3, White 4, White 5. Code names for sprawling refineries that produce millions of gallons of fuel for panzer divisions and Luftwaffe squadrons. In the cockpit of a B-24 from the 93rd Bomb Group, Colonel Addison Baker keeps his aircraft steady even as the first bursts of light flak streak past the nose. His co-pilot, Major John Jerstad, scans the instruments with mechanical precision: oil pressure, manifold temperature, fuel mixture. Both men know what awaits. The plan called for arriving unseen, but somewhere over Yugoslavia, the element of surprise died.
Now, Romanian spotters and German radar stations have had time to wake every gun within 50 miles. At 300 feet, then 200, the Liberators race past church steeples and farmhouses where civilians scatter into doorways. The bombers are so low that De Luca can see faces, laundry on lines, a dog running beside a road. Then the landscape changes. Industrial towers rise like tombstones, pipelines snake across the ground, and smokestacks belch black columns into the August heat. The flak opens up like hell's own fireworks. Tracers, orange, white, red, arc toward the formation in streams that seem almost lazy until they intersect with aluminum skin. A 37mm shell punches through the wing of a nearby B-24, tearing metal and hydraulic lines. Another bomber takes hits in the waist, and De Luca sees the gunner inside jerk backward, his hands flying off the weapon. The interphone erupts with voices, damage reports, altitude checks, bomb door status, all compressed into seconds of adrenaline and training.
"Flak batteries at 11 o'clock, someone shouts. Jesus Christ! The sentence dies as a burst of 88mm fire detonates beside the formation, close enough that the shockwave hammers the fuselage like a giant fist. De Luca feels the aircraft shudder, metal groaning, and for a moment gravity seems uncertain. Then the pilot wrestles the yoke, and the nose steadies again, engines roaring defiance. Ahead, Colonel Baker's bomber takes direct hits. Fire erupts from the left wing, spreading fast, hungry. Standard procedure demands he abort, climb, bail out, save the crew. Instead, Baker holds course. His target looms, the Astro Romana refinery, a maze of crocking towers and storage tanks, worth more to the Reich than 100 Tiger tanks. The bomb bay doors roll open. "Steady," Baker says over the interphone, his voice tight but controlled. "Bombardier, your aircraft." The refinery fills the Norden bomb site's glass.
At this altitude, there's no math, no drift calculations, just aim and release. The Liberator shudders as ordnance drops away. 500-pounders, incendiaries, bundles of destruction tumbling toward pipelines and fuel storage. Explosions bloom across the refinery like orange flowers, each blast throwing shrapnel and debris skyward. But Baker's bomber is dying. The fire has consumed half the wing now, flames licking back toward the fuselage. He could still pull up, still give the crew a chance to jump. Instead, he holds steady, ensuring every bomb hits home until the wing finally collapses and the aircraft rolls into the ground in a fireball visible for miles. Major Jerstad, flying beside him, watches his friend die. Then he too flies into the inferno, because there are still bombs to drop and targets to destroy. DeLuca doesn't see Baker's end. He's too busy firing at a flak tower, too busy watching another Liberator, this one trailing smoke from 3 engines, limp past so close he can read the nose art. The sky over Ploiești has become a slaughterhouse, where aluminum meets steel at closing speeds measured in hundreds of miles per hour.
The Columbia Aquila refinery burns with a fury that turns daylight into dusk. Smoke, black, chemical-laced, choking, rises in columns so thick they create their own weather, and Liberators disappear into the haze, only to emerge seconds later with new holes punched through their skin. In the waist of his aircraft, DeLuca fires burst after burst at ground positions, the .5 caliber vibrating his arms numb, spent brass casings ringing against the deck like deadly rain. A B-24 from the 98th Bomb Group, Pyramiders, crosses directly over a burning storage tank just as it detonates. The blast lifts the aircraft 30 feet, flipping it nearly inverted before the pilot somehow wrestles it level again. One engine is dead, another streaming coolant, but the bomber claws for altitude on 2 screaming Pratt & Whitneys, every rivet protesting.
Lieutenant Colonel Leon Johnson leads the 44th Bomb Group, the Flying 8-Balls, toward the Credital Minier refinery through a gauntlet of light flak so dense it looks like a steel curtain. His bomber takes hits in the nose, the cockpit glass spiderwebbing from a 20mm round that passes inches from his head. The co-pilot jerks, but keeps his hands on the throttles. No time for fear, no room for hesitation. Bomb doors open, Johnson commands, voice flat despite the chaos. The Liberator's distinctive rolling doors peel back, exposing the bomb bay to the firestorm below. The bombardier toggles the release, and 2 tons of high explosive and incendiary ordnance tumble free. Cracking towers collapse like broken spines. Pipelines rupture, spewing crude that ignites on contact with burning debris. The refinery, one of the largest in Romania, transforms from an industrial complex into an industrial funeral pyre. But the cost mounts with every second. A flak shell finds the fuel tanks of a 376th Bomb Group aircraft. The explosion is instantaneous. No fire, no descent, just a flash, and then pieces raining down across a residential district. 10 men gone in the time it takes to blink. Another bomber, crippled by ground fire, struggles to gain altitude, but clips a smokestack with its right wing. The impact tears the wing off at the root, and the Liberator cartwheels into the earth, scattering wreckage across a rail yard. In the sky, what remains of the formation begins the desperate climb toward safety. Some aircraft have been hit so many times they look like flying cheese graters. Aluminum skin shredded, control cables severed and spliced with wire, hydraulic fluid spraying from ruptured lines. Gunners who still have ammunition scan for the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs that will surely come once the bombers leave the flak umbrella.
DeLuca's aircraft clears the refinery complex, engines straining, and he catches a glimpse backward through the smoke. Ploiești is burning. Not just one refinery, but multiple, flames leaping hundreds of feet, secondary explosions sending shockwaves that rattle windows miles away. The Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht will feel this. Panzer divisions will idle, waiting for fuel that won't come. Fighter squadrons will ration their sorties. For months, maybe longer, the Reich's oil supply will choke. But DeLuca also sees the aircraft that won't make it home. At least 40 Liberators are down, some crashed in the target area, others scattered across Romanian farmland, where survivors will spend the rest of the war in prison camps. Over 500 men lost in a single mission. The math is brutal. Roughly 1 in 3 aircraft that started this morning won't return to North Africa. The interphone crackles. Navigator to pilot, heading 205. Get us the hell out of here.
The pilot doesn't respond with words,
just banks the aircraft southwest, toward the Mediterranean, toward safety. Behind them, the pregnant plane that German crews mocked has just delivered the heaviest blow against Axis oil production of the entire war. The refineries at Ploiești, targets that conventional high-altitude bombing couldn't touch, now burn because crews in awkward, ungainly bombers flew into the guns at treetop height and refused to flinch. De Luca slumps against the fuselage, ears ringing, hands shaking. Through the waste window, Romania fades into haze. Somewhere ahead, if they can keep these engines running, is an airfield, a debrief, and the knowledge that they survived what shouldn't be survivable. The Mediterranean appears as a thin blue line on the horizon, shimmering in the afternoon heat, like a mirage that refuses to solidify. De Luca's Liberator flies in a ragged formation with other survivors, aircraft trailing smoke, limping on 3 engines, some with entire sections of tail or wing shot away. The radio operator, a kid from Ohio named Kowalski, keeps transmitting their position and damage status, knowing that ditching in the sea is a real possibility for some crews. Inside the aircraft, the reality of what they've done and what it cost settles like a weight. The bombardier sits with his head in his hands, still seeing the fireballs bloom across his bomb sight. The top turret gunner has a piece of shrapnel embedded in his shoulder, but refuses morphine until they land. Every man deals with it differently. Some smoke cigarettes with shaking hands, others stare at nothing, and a few check and recheck their parachutes, as if the harness might betray them.
Through the interphone comes the voice of their pilot, First Lieutenant Howard, steady despite flying an aircraft that should, by all rights, have fallen out of the sky over Romania. We're not out of this yet. Luftwaffe knows we're coming back hurt. Stay sharp. The warning proves prophetic 20 minutes later when the formation's tail gunners start shouting contact reports. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, 4 of them, maybe 5, diving from altitude where they've been shadowing the bombers like wolves tracking wounded prey. The fighters come in fast, cannons winking, and the Liberators' defensive guns hammer back in streams of tracer fire that lace the sky with geometry. A 109 rolls past De Luca's position so close he can see the pilot's leather helmet, the mottled camouflage pattern on the fuselage, the oil stains around the engine cowling. He leads the target, squeezes the trigger, and watches his rounds connect with the fighter's wing root. Smoke trails, then fire.
The Messerschmitt peels away, losing altitude, and De Luca doesn't watch to see if the pilot bails out. There's another fighter coming in from 2 o'clock. The engagement lasts 7 minutes, an eternity when measured in heartbeats and ammunition expenditure. 2 more Liberators go down. One loses its tail to cannon fire and enters a flat spin that ends in the Aegean Sea. The other catches fire and the crew bails out, parachutes blossoming like white flowers against the blue. But the formation's concentrated firepower, dozens of .50 caliber guns firing in coordinated bursts, prove too costly for the German pilots. They break off, vectoring back toward Romania, leaving the bombers to continue their wounded journey. The coast of Libya emerges from the haze around 1600 hours. Ground crews at Benghazi have been monitoring radio traffic all day, tallying call signs, counting who made it and who didn't. When the first Liberators appear, engines coughing, landing gear manually cranked down after hydraulic failures, mechanics and officers stand in small groups, watching in silence. Howard brings his aircraft in on a long, shallow approach, nursing the controls, talking to the bomber like it's a tired horse being asked for one last effort. The main wheels touch, bounce, settle. The nose wheel drops, brakes shriek. The Liberator rolls to a stop at the far end of the runway, and for a moment nobody moves. Then the crew begins the process of shutting down engines, securing switches, gathering equipment. When they finally step onto the tarmac, legs unsteady, ears still ringing, the ground feels strange, too solid, too still. DeLuca counts the holes in his aircraft while waiting for the debrief. 37 punctures in the fuselage, 2 engines with damaged cylinders, hydraulic lines jury-rigged with wire and tape, 1 waist gunner wounded, but alive.
The crew chief walks around the bomber, shaking his head, then looks at DeLuca and says simply, "She brought you home." The debriefing tent smells of sweat, coffee, and cigarette smoke, a temporary cathedral where men give testimony to what they've seen. Intelligence officers sit with clipboards and maps marked with colored pins, asking questions in voices that try to be clinical but can't quite hide the weight of the day's losses. How many bombs on target? What was the flak density? Did you see Colonel Baker go down? DeLuca answers when his turn comes, his words flak and factual, describing the refinery fires and the gun positions and the fighters over the Mediterranean. But he doesn't mention the way his hands still shake when he reaches for his coffee cup, or how he keeps hearing the sound of that 20mm round punching through the fuselage 3 feet from where he stood. The numbers arrive in pieces throughout the evening. Of the 177 B-24 Liberators that launched from North Africa, 54 won't return. Some burned over Ploiești, others crashed in Romania, Bulgaria, or Turkey. A few ditched in the sea.
The human cost: 532 airmen killed, captured, or missing. 5 medals of honor will be awarded, including posthumously to Colonel Baker and Major Gerstad, the most for any single military action in American history. But the refineries burn. Intelligence analysts, working through reconnaissance photographs and resistance reports over the following weeks, calculate that Ploiești's oil production has been cut by 40%. The Concordia Vega refinery, completely destroyed. The Columbia Aquila, crippled for months. The Creditel Miniere and Astra Ramona, severely damaged. German and Romanian engineers work around the clock to restore capacity, but the damage runs too deep. Crocking towers can't be rebuilt overnight. Specialized equipment takes months to replace. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, reviewing the mission reports, writes that Ploiești raid represents, quote, one of the most courageous operations of the war, though he adds privately that such losses cannot be sustained. The B-24 proved it could deliver devastating firepower at any altitude, but the price paid by those crews becomes a lesson written in blood. Low-level bombing against heavy defenses is a tactic reserved for targets worth dying for. Yet even as medals are pinned and casualties are counted, the Liberators' war is far from over. In England, the 8th Air Force expands its fleet of B-24s for the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. In the Pacific, Liberators flying from island bases begin the long-range missions against Japanese shipping and installations. In the Mediterranean, North Africa, China-Burma-India theater, wherever the Allies need reach and payload, the pregnant plane proves its worth. The production lines at Consolidated in San Diego, Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan, Douglas in Tulsa, and North American in Dallas work 3 shifts 7 days a week.
By 1944, a new B-24 rolls off the assembly line every 63 minutes at Willow Run, Henry Ford's massive factory producing bombers with the same efficiency once reserved for automobiles. The numbers become staggering: 18,482 Liberators built by war's end, more than any other American military aircraft in history. Crews stop calling it pregnant. They call it reliable. They call it the plane that brings you home. They call it the bomber that, for all its awkward looks and uncomfortable crew positions, can absorb punishment and keep flying when sleeker aircraft would already be falling. At Benghazi, as August fades into September, DeLuca's crew receives a new aircraft, factory fresh, unmarked, smelling of paint and oil. The crew chief stencils their mission count on the nose: 1 bomb for Ploiești. there will be more.